Welcome, everyone. This is the New Bedford Community Preservation Committee. I'm Jan De Silva. I'm the chair of the committee. I'd like to call the meeting to order. It is now 6:14 on June 27, 2023. We welcome you to the meeting tonight of the Community Preservation Commission. If you have a cell phone or other electronic device, please turn it off or set it to silence. If you wish to speak at today's hearing, you will be provided that opportunity at the appropriate time. Please be aware that this meeting is being filmed by New Bedford Cable Access, and so that information, you'll see it on Cable Access in a couple of weeks. So I'm going to do a roll call of the members. The members of the CPC in the audience are Melissa Chester-Latendre, who's an at-large member. Christopher Amaral, who's an at-large member. Diane Barabee, who's a member of the Park Board. Peter Blanchard, who's a member of the Conservation Commission. Leona Fisher, New Bedford Housing Authority, and Leona is not present. Arthur Glassman, member of the Planning Board, who's present, and Jody Siebert, who's an at-large member. All right, we already did the minutes, and so now, and we already opened the public, I'll make another motion to open the public hearing. So I need to entertain a motion to open the public hearing. Moved by Peter Blanchard, seconded by Melissa Chester-Latendre. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, the meeting is called to order. The public hearing is now open. Please address all comments directly to the committee chair. Comments between members of the public are not permitted. As you address the committee, please state your name and address for the record. I'm welcoming you to this meeting. This is the meeting that we have once a year where we talk about the community plan so everyone understands what the Community Preservation Commission has been doing, what our plans are for the future, and kind of gives you a timeline for everything that we're going to be doing within the next few months. I'd like to welcome to the podium Jessica Bailey, who is the CPA manager. Jessica is one of the faces of the CPC. She coordinates all our activities with the public and also with our grantees. So, Jessica, please come to the podium.
Thank you, Jan. So, good evening, everyone. Tonight is about reviewing the draft plan, and the draft plan is available on the website. If you go to the New Bedford City of New Bedford website, at the top there's a drop down and you can find the Community Preservation Committee. At the top you'll find the link for the draft. Most years there's not a lot of changes from year to year. Every year I send out to the boards and commissions that are represented on the CPC the information that's contained in the plan, so I ask them for any input. Have any needs changed, goals, priorities? This year, the biggest change is under community housing. Some of you may be aware, in the spring, the mayor announced, and I'm going to get my glasses so I can read it, Building New Bedford, Strategies to Promote Affordable Housing for All in a Thriving New Bedford. And within that plan, there were a number of short, midterm, and long-term range plans that the mayor outlined in his report. And that we have then looked at and incorporated some of that information within the plan. Not everything that is in the plan or that is identified as a goal or a priority is eligible under CPA, but we need to look at what the city needs as a whole, so they are included in the plan even if they can't receive CPA funding. So welcome. Jan's already introduced me. Thank you so much, Jan. And we're going to talk about a little bit about CPA, the plan, next steps, and then asking for public input. So for those of you who don't know, CPA has been around for 23 years, and it is now in 195 cities and towns across the Commonwealth. It is a fantastic tool for organizations throughout the Commonwealth because it allows them to access funding they might not otherwise have access to, particularly historic preservation funding. So many nonprofits occupy these historic buildings across the Commonwealth, but funders don't fund historic preservation, they fund programs. So for organizations such as the Women's Center or the Roach-Jones Duff House that are really important parts of our community, they can't get the historic preservation money to maintain the exteriors except through CPA. Additionally, it also allows the municipalities to fill in those holes where the budget might not be able to move projects forward without some help, or in some cases, it allows organizations and the community, municipalities to get first money in, if you will. A lot of times the states look at that and say, do you have local support? And CPA allows us to do that. There's two sources of funding for those in the community. There's a surcharge on real estate. The first $100,000 is exempt, and then the calculation is based upon the remaining amount. There's also the state trust fund, and that is funded through the Registry of Deeds fees that are collected when a property exchanges hands. And this is a quick calculation that shows how the surcharge is calculated on an average home value in the city. Excuse me, ignore the error at the top, but the value of at the top of 300 minus the 100,000 exemption brings you to that. You do the calculations, and on the average house, it's $45.08 a year, which comes out to about $11.27 a quarter. But what that has done is enabled these organizations to leverage funds. We've collected, I think, about $7.9 million in surcharge over the last few years since FY16. But we've been able to leverage that with what has been reported so far into 7.2 additional funding that added on top of that 8.4 that CPA has already given out. It's over almost $16 million in funding that's gone out since FY16. You've met all the members of the board. Right now, we do have a vacancy, and one of our longtime founding members stepped down after the end of his third term. His last three-year term. And we are always looking for members. The information is online. If anybody is ever interested in serving on a board and commission, they can always contact the mayor's office and put an application in. The committee has some major responsibilities because they're responsible for assessing the community preservation needs of the city, and that's through this hearing and also soliciting the input of the boards and commissions. Additionally, that leads to developing the community preservation plan. Within that plan is the priorities, the goals, but it also gives each of the organizations that are going to apply the roadmap, the instructions, the application information, all of that is contained within so that it's a very comprehensive, transparent package. Additionally, the CPC creates an annual budget for the City Council that talks about how they intend to allocate, and then they do the application cycle itself, and at the end of that, they do the recommendations to City Council. And at that point, the City Council can approve, reject, or reduce the CPC's funding recommendations. So for those of you who aren't as familiar, this is a really quick and easy to decide if a project is eligible. And it's the action verbs here: they acquire, create, preserve, support, rehabilitate, or restore, and whether or not it's eligible under each of these categories. So if you are thinking about an idea and you're an organization or you belong to an organization or you have an idea that you want to bring to the Parks Department or DPI or the Mayor's Office, these are really great ways. This is a quick way to look and say, would it fall within CPA? Could CPA funding be used to move this project forward? And of course, I'm always available if anybody has any questions about that. But it's a nice, easy way to, when you're looking at a project idea, to sort of figure out if it's under historic preservation. Is it to buy it? Yeah, we can use CPA funding, but we can't create historic preservation projects with, CPA money. And the plan. That's the purpose of tonight's meeting and hearing, is to talk about the plan. It's really important for us as a community to have a very clear path and a clear plan as to how we're going to spend the money that has been entrusted to us by the taxpayers. We have to establish those processes by which we're going to review the applications, the timeline by which and all this is contained in the plan, so that when an organization or a department is looking to apply, they know exactly what's expected of them, when everything is due, and what information that they need to provide to the CPC to be reviewed. It also helps the public to know how the CPC is reviewing all these projects, so that in the end, they understand the transparent process by which all of these determinations and recommendations are made to City Council. I'm going to talk briefly about the categories so that those who are maybe watching or here can understand where projects can fall in terms of categories. So for open space, it's spent on acquisition, creation, and preservation of open space. And we can only use CPA money to rehabilitate or restore open space if it was acquired with CPA funding. But here's a number of different ways in which, and this is just a brief list of the ways that open space can be defined. This open space is also part of the recreation category. It's a dual category. So some of the goals and priorities within the community. We don't have a lot of open space in the city. We're a pretty densely populated city. There's not a lot of open space, but we have been able to do a number of things where we've either supported an open space project or we've outright funded an open space project. The Acushnet Sawmill up in the North End was one of the first open space projects that CPA funded back in FY18, and that expanded the footprint of that park so it crosses over Acushnet and New Bedford. But there's other ways that we can support projects that are happening in the community that are related to open space because they fall under recreation. So things like trails, youth sports, community gardens, parks, playgrounds, athletic fields. The only thing we cannot do is buy artificial turf. We cannot do maintenance. We cannot do anything of stadiums or gymnasiums or any indoor recreation. It has to be outdoor recreational activities. It can be defined both as active recreation and passive recreation. And here are some of the goals and priorities of that are outlined in the plan. And again, not all of these can be eligible, but they all are, they support each other and they weave together the priorities so that what we may be supporting one portion, another funding source can support another portion. And together, those funding funders can then bring together in a project and bring it to fruition. And some of the things are, making sure that we expand outdoor recreational opportunities for New Bedford residents of all ages and abilities. And that's when we talk about passive and active recreation, for example. There's a lot of people who enjoy walking, but then there's a lot of people who enjoy skateboarding. There's people who enjoy biking. So it's providing different ways for people to utilize our parks. Then there's also making sure they're ADA compliant. That's an important aspect when we talk about access. Additionally, encouraging people to utilize our public spaces and to have access is critical in our community. We've been fortunate enough that we've partnered a lot with the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Beaches on many projects in all the three major parks. When you think of parks, you think of Brookline, Buttonwood, and Hazelwood, but we've also done work at Riverside Park, the Acushnet Sawmill, which is a private organization's property. But we've also done projects at schools. This year, the CPC recommended to the City Council the Sergeant Carney Academy playground that'll be done hopefully within the next year. So it's doing things both on park property and school property, as well as property owned by private nonprofits. And all of those come together to fulfill some of these goals. Historic resources, we are a really historic city. One of the great things about CPA is that the flexibility that allows each community to determine our own goals and priorities. In our community, we have a lot of nonprofits that inhabit these historic structures. And like I was saying earlier, there's not a lot of funding sources. And that was one of the reasons CPA was created in the Commonwealth back in the late 1990s, was that the nonprofits realized that they were inhabiting these buildings that they couldn't necessarily maintain to the standards that they wanted to. And these buildings are part of the character of all these communities. If you ever have a project that you're thinking about historic preservation, the first place you're going to have to start is with the Historic Commission, because the project or the building, whatever it is, the object that you wish to have funding for must be determined must be deemed by the local historic commission to be significant in its history, its archaeology, and the culture of the community. So I always encourage, if you're thinking about an idea, get in touch with me or get in touch with the Historic Commission to walk through that process because it will need to be done before you put an application in. And here are some of the goals and priorities to talk about. It is really about protecting, preserving, enhancing, restoring, rehabilitating. It's all about re-engaging and reactivating these spaces. And a lot of times, we're seeing some projects that are dual purpose, where it's an historic preservation project, but there's also the other purposes, maybe affordable or workforce housing. Capitol Theater comes to mind, the Hillman Street property that's going to be rehabilitated, the Holy Family High School, which is now being turned into workforce housing. Those are all projects that have historic preservation component, but they have a secondary benefit of providing housing, which is so critical in our community right now. Additionally, by supporting the organizations who inhabit these nonprofits with historic preservation money, they then can focus their funding on the programs and their core missions, similar to like what the Rochester Duff House or the Women's Center on County Street, the James Arnold Mansion, the Whaling Museum. The First Baptist Church is a big example of work that is being done to preserve a vital piece, an element of our downtown, and it's going to have an adaptive reuse into a theater space, not only for your theater, but for other theater groups as well. And then lastly is community housing. And like I was saying, this is the area where we did a little more work based on the mayor's report that was released this spring. Community housing, as we all know, is critical right now, not only in our community, but in the surrounding communities. And we have a number of projects which are dual, that serve both purposes of historic preservation as well as community housing. And these are some of the goals and priorities that we've had in the past. I don't know that, I have to look which ones that I did not add to. These inform the goals and priorities. The needs inform the goals and priorities. So some of the needs we're talking about: increasing home ownership, also increasing collaboration between outlying communities, because the housing crisis is not just about New Bedford, it's about all the surrounding communities, and that the need for affordable housing in each of the communities that surround us is also important. And how can we collaborate as a region to fulfill the needs of all of our residents across each of our town and city lines? How do we increase that supply of affordable housing to low and moderate income households, workforce housing, keep people who are just graduating? How do we enable them to stay in our community and not be priced out of the housing market? So there's a lot of different ways that CPA can help with this, with this housing crisis, and that it can provide funding to these projects. As you probably have read, a lot of these projects take a number of years to get all the funding in place, but there are several exciting projects that are happening in our community right now that have received CPA funding, and that will add to when all are said and done, over the next, I would say, 18 months to 24 months, there'll be about 149 new units of housing that receive CPA funding over the last few years. So the draft plan is online. It's online until July 14th. At the next meeting at the CPC on July 25th, they will review the final draft. That draft will include any input that we receive tonight or over the next few weeks. People are more than welcome to provide me input by sending it to the CPA at newbedford-ma.gov. They can mail it in to the planning department at City Hall. All this information is online, and I'll take all that and add it to the plan. The CPC will review it and then vote on accepting the plan in July. Once that is done, we'll set the timeline for the coming cycle. I do know that the first meeting for the cycle will be the technical workshop, which will take place here. That'll be on September 7th, and that's the evening where potential applicants can come, ask questions about the process. How do you apply? Is my project eligible? But in the meantime, we do want to hear from the community about what you see as the needs, a goal that you don't see addressed in the plan that you might want to bring to our attention. Additionally, we have received emails saying, I have this great idea for this park. Who do I talk to? And I'm happy to point everybody in the right direction of who they need to speak with in order to discuss their idea with the appropriate department in the city. So, like I said, here are the next steps. The technical workshop will be September 7th. We begin the review work in January with public presentations, with culminating with the recommendations to City Council by, that vote is usually by the second week of February. And then the City Council typically takes up the recommendations March, April, in a series of meetings, with their final vote typically taking place by middle of May. This is the website. If anybody wishes to learn more, look at the draft, and to send any information in. So that's all I have. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. So, Jan?
Thank you, Jessica, for explaining CPC to everyone in the room and the outer community of New Bedford. I forgot to introduce myself, to be honest. I always do that. I'm Jan DeSilva, I'm the chair, and I represent the New Bedford Historical Commission. So if you want to talk about historic properties, you can contact me to talk about that too. So again, if there's anybody in the audience who has any questions, we'll entertain questions now. Any questions? We do have a couple people in the audience, which is great. All right, so as Jessica said, you have until July 14th to send any kind of comments, whether they're email, phone, letter, snail, camel, whatever you want to do to send your message. And this concludes the opportunity for the public to comment at this hearing. And do I have a motion from the committee to close the public hearing? Motion made by Jody Sievert, seconded by Diane Barabee. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. And now, with no other comments, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. Motion made by Jody Sievert, seconded by Diane Barabee. All in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Okay, thank you everyone for participating. And if you have any questions, you know where to find us.